Okay, I think it's time to start. So hi everyone, welcome. Thanks for coming to this talk. It's always sort of like heartwarming when people actually show up to your talk. My name is Einar. I am a software developer and architect at Norkart, and I'm here to talk about something that I call the AI puppet dance. And I should add a disclaimer that these are like my opinions, not necessarily the opinions of my employer. I guess also not necessarily not those of my employer either, but just to make it very clear that these are my opinions. Okay, so I'd like to start about talking about how we sort of like frame this discussion about AI, and I think it's often framed very poorly, which leads to very poor discussions or really no discussion at all, or no meaningful discussion. So the typical framing is this binary opposition, right? So are you for or against AI? Which is kind of like a stupid question, right? It reduces this really complex issue about something important that's happening in our society to this single bit, right? And divides the world into two parts in the process. And at that point, we're sort of no longer talking about the issues, we are talking about classifications of people. So which camp do you belong to, right? So you're creating teams. So what's the motive for creating those teams? It's not to discuss the issues about AI. And because language works the way that it does, words come with connotations, which is why we can describe the exact same divide using different words that are sort of like synonyms to the words that I just showed you. So what does this mean? Are you an optimist or are you a pessimist with respect to what? And we can keep going. We can substitute new words for the same divide. Are you happy? Are you cranky? Are you courageous? Are you cowardly? Are you fast or are you slow? Are you part of the future? Or are you part of the past? Are you part of the solution? Are you part of the problem? These are all descriptions of the same divide. And this kind of binary framing is about determining tribal membership, right? Not to talk about what AI is and isn't and can do and cannot do and so on and so forth, but to create these teams. And I think this is sort of like below our dignity as humans, right? We pride ourselves and we've sort of labeled ourselves as the wise one among the apes, right? And this binary framing, creating oppositions, is something more primitive than being a wise ape. The purpose of this talk is to raise this question. Do we face artificial intelligence with sort of like the best of our own human intelligence? And this is one of those rhetorical questions. I mean to imply that the answer is no, we do not. So a quick agenda for this talk. I will be talking first about, and we're going to sort of describe and challenge some narratives that are out there that shape our perceptions and actions concerning AI. I'm going to talk about hype and reality as it applies to sort of investment and return on investment in AI. I'm going to talk a little bit about the application of AI to the task of programming and whether or not we can expect AI to be one of these sort of magical silver bullets that we would like to find. Then I'm going to talk about some of the harms that I see with the current AI hype. Finally, I'm going to share some resources that have sort of influenced my thinking about these issues. But first, we have to ask a very, very important question, which is this: are we idiots? And I mean this not as a joke, I mean it as a sort of like earnest question, are we idiots? And the reason that I think we need to sort of ask this question is that we seem to be asking a lot of idiot questions. Right, that sort of point towards us being idiots. So I'd like to sort of dismiss those idiot questions so that we can sort of clear the space for some more interesting questions to ask and answer instead. Now, one of those is that some of you in this room may be wondering, well, so are you for or against AI? Me personally, right? So this is an idiot question. I'm not going to come with an answer. I don't want us to behave like idiots. I'm not an idiot. I don't think you are idiots. So let's not ask questions like this. Whether or not I'm sort of like for or personally for or against AI is completely irrelevant to anything that has to do with this discussion. It's also badly defined because what even is AI, right? So it's sort of like asking someone, are you for or against technology? Right? It doesn't make any sense. So I'm not going to sort of like dignify that with an answer. The same goes for this question, is AI good or bad? So it's an idiot question because AI is a million different things, right? And some of those things have both good and bad sides. So it's sort of like this ambiguous state, and we don't really know what to make of it yet. So to try again to reduce it to this single Boolean that sort of is the final answer is something that idiots would do, right? So let's not spend our time on that. It's an idiot question. This is also an idiot question. Is AI hype or useful? It's not one or the other. It's perfectly possible for something to be wildly overhyped and still useful in some context, right? So this is a false dichotomy. False dichotomies are for idiots. Has AI come to stay? It's an obvious idiot question, right? AI is a broad field. It's been we're talking like 60 plus years of applied research and development. There are a lot of systems out there that sort of like infrastructure today that sort of fall under the umbrella of AI. That has nothing to do with the current AI hype. So no one really doubts that AI in some form has come to stay. Right? So why are we asking this question? No one really doubts that. This makes this an idiot question as well. I'm not going to spend any more time on that, considering whether or not AI is a flop. What about this one? Is this an idiot question? It's a little less obvious. Right? It depends on what you mean by a flop. Right? If you mean by a flop that it's like everything that has to do with generative AI is going to be sort of like gone in 3 years, and then that's obviously wrong, and no one thinks that, right? So there will be a lot of generative AI tools in society doing useful work, doing not so useful work in the future. So that's an idiot question. If you, by a flop, mean that a lot of people are going to be disappointed and that generative AI did not bring the kind of sort of results that they hoped it would do, then it's a little less obvious, and time will tell. And it's worth noting that we have been disappointed before. This is sort of my Gartner-inspired hype curve for artificial intelligence. We have concepts like AI winter and AI spring for a reason. But we'll see. So what is AI? It's badly defined. And I think it's important to sort of dig a little bit into it because I think we're often mixing different aspects of AI together when we discuss AI, and that's not very good when you try to think clearly and ask better questions. So if you consider AI as a technology, it's a bunch of different things. It's existed as a field since the late 50s. There has been a lot of different research, different approaches, and this has been a benefit for the field as such, that it's so broad that you can do a lot of different things under the same umbrella. Now, the current hype is mostly regarding generative AI, and then sort of this notion of artificial general intelligence, sort of lurking in the background as like a tantalizing promise of where this might lead. But it's also all these different things, right? No one seems to be talking about like AlphaZero anymore, but there are a bunch of things. What about AI as a concept? And this is sort of more like a philosophical question, right? More than the technologies. So it's important to understand that intelligent is an abstraction, right? It's not an essence. It's not a physical quantity. It's not. You can't really open people's head up and see how much of this stuff is it in there. So when we're talking about intelligence, what we're really doing is that we're using language to point in the general direction of certain aspects of human behavior, right? And that's all. There's nothing more to it than that. We're sort of just pointing, describing, trying to talk about some aspects of human behavior. And those things are interwoven with different other things like consciousness, planning, thinking, and so forth. And those are also abstractions and basically just pointing towards different aspects of the same mess. And this is not so much of a problem when we're sort of discussing human intelligence, because we're pointing towards the same messes, right? Intelligence and consciousness and thinking and all that stuff is sort of mixed together in roughly the same way inside human heads, right? Because we're quite similar. So it's not so much a problem that we're using these sort of like coarse-grained abstractions to talk about these things. When we start to talk about artificial intelligence, it becomes very different. Right? So suddenly we're sort of treating intelligence, human intelligence, as a metaphor for something else. And we're pointing towards a different kind of mess. It's not the same mess. And then we lose sort of the richness that is implied by pointing towards a certain sort of shared mess that we all have inside our heads. And we're trying to make sort of like a comparison now between this artificial intelligence and our human intelligence based on sort of an idea of an essence that doesn't exist. And that makes this here, can we make a machine that is smarter than humans, also an idiot question, because we don't know what this smarter means, right? Because we don't have an essence that we can compare. Right? A better question to ask would be something like, which tasks are out there that humans apply their intelligence to solve, that machines could solve in a way that's maybe faster, better, cheaper than humans can. Right? And we know there are tasks like that. Right? So chess is an obvious example of something that a machine will do better than humans. Okay, to understand AI as a phenomenon in the world today, we must look at the narratives that we use to describe it, the stories that people tell. And the first narrative that I would like to discuss is the revolution narrative. And this goes like something like this: AI changes everything. And when I see that narrative and I hear that narrative told, I'm like, everything? Everything is a lot, right? Everything is the whole world. So when I look around me, I see a lot of things where it's not obvious that AI will change anything, right? A lot of things, almost all of the stuff, is going to be untouched by AI, right? Unless you're sort of this AI doomer kind of person who thinks that, okay, we have super intelligence sort of impending in a couple of years, and we're all going to be eradicated. But then we have different problems than discussing this, right? I think the fundamentals will stay the same. And the same goes for a lot of kinds of work as well. So say your task, the task that you want to solve, is garbage collection in a city, right? And you can probably use AI to sort of solve like the traveling salesman problem in a really clever way, right? But ultimately, someone will have to pick up the garbage. So the task remains essentially the same, right? So if we're going to be more honest, we'll sort of have to backtrack a little bit, right? We might say something like AI changes many things. But that's also, right, so it's a bit premature, right? Insisting that the change is already happening is a bit premature, and it's another narrative, right? It's more like a wishful prediction that's something that we know for sure. So we have to sort of moderate ourselves a little, even more, like to say something like AI will change many things. And if we keep going, getting increasingly honest and more precise, we might end up with something like this: AI is likely to change some things within certain domains. This is probably true. Right? I feel confident saying this. But I can understand why Sam Altman would go for sort of the simpler narrative that we started with. Right? Because it's easier to sell that narrative than to sell this one. Then there's the train narrative. I don't know how many of you people are on LinkedIn. If you are on LinkedIn, you will have heard the train narrative. The idea is that this metaphorical train is leaving the station. And we need to all sort of need to hurry on board, right? It plays on this fear of getting left behind. And yeah, it's always seemed funny to me that it's always a train, right? Always a train leaving the station. It's never the Titanic heaving up anchor. But okay, the idea here is, so what does this narrative communicate? Like it tells us that there is no time to think. It creates this sense of urgency, right? we can't sort of stop and think and ask questions. We need to act instead. And it's sort of, there's a grand irony, to me at least, that at the same time that we're sort of like fawning over the intelligence of these machines, at the same time it's sort of like apparently incredibly backwards and boring and cowardly to be sort of applying our own intelligence. So we need to act instead of thinking. That doesn't make sense to me. And to be honest, I wonder sort of like what the rush is. So say now, again, you're not solving problems in the abstract, but you're providing something important like healthcare for the elderly. Right? What happens if you don't do anything that has to do with AI for the next like 3 to 5 years? Right? Will you be providing like radically worse healthcare for the elderly? Probably not. Right? There are a lot of domains like that where there really is no rush. And yet everything is sort of like scrambling. We need an AI strategy now, right? Or we'll be left behind. So I wonder what happens if we just wait, right? Not everyone has to be on the bleeding edge, because the point with the bleeding edge is that you're sort of like bleeding when you're on the edge, right? And not everyone has to bleed. You can let some of the other people bleed, and then you might see if there's something useful you can pick up a little later on. So whenever I hear the train narrative, I grew up reading like Asterix and Lucky Luke, so I think in terms of these strips. So whenever I hear the train narrative, I think of this. It's the speed that will conquer this rugged country. And then this guy comes along and says, the scalp cover fell off your head. I picked it up, but grabbed it quickly. I'm in a hurry. So how fast is this train? Is what I'm asking. Another narrative has to do with sort of like faith in the capabilities of the next version. And it goes like this. Since everything is progressing at this breakneck speed, right, any problems that we face with current tools today are not really problems at all, because they will be solved in the next version. And if they're not solved in the next version, it's going to be solved in the next after that, and so on and so forth. But we have evidence that this is not entirely true, right? If you consider something like self-driving cars, right? Fully autonomous, I think they call it level 5 self-driving cars, where sort of you can really relax and not have a human in the loop, has been like 2 to 3 years away for more than a decade. Right? So it's not obvious that you will be able to solve all of your problems like this. The idea is that you sort of progress iteratively towards perfection. And this is connected to what I call the extrapolation narrative, which claims that progress in AI will be linear or even superlinear. What I mean by that is, so what is sort of the arch that we're looking at here? The exponential one would be something like this, then you have linear, and then you have this thing over here. And most technologies follow this curve. Right? You have rapid progress in the beginning, and then you sort of start to hit limits. Right? Even Moore's law is no longer progressing in the way that it used to be. It sort of seems to have hit a roof. Right? And the same thing goes for, when GPT-3 was launched, it was a big thing, right? It's very impressive. Is GPT-4 twice as good as that? Is GPT-5 twice as good as GPT-4? It doesn't seem to be like that, right? And it's also worth remembering that to ask this question, what are we really plotting in the case of AI? Is it intelligence? Because intelligence that we just talked about is an abstraction, right? It's not an essence. So it's very, very hard to say that something is twice as intelligent as something else. Like a human is twice as intelligent as a turtle. I mean, it's easy to say, but it doesn't mean anything. Right? How do we sort of validate something like that? You can only ever be arbitrary. We can define a human to be twice as intelligent as a turtle, but again, what does it mean? Same goes for other candidates, such like capabilities or powers. These are all abstractions. Then there is the brainiac narrative, which is, I think it's kind of amusing, really. But it is real, right? And the idea is that the people working on AI are incredibly smart, some of the smartest people in the world. they are so smart that they cannot possibly be wrong in their predictions. And this is what I call the Sheldon Cooper argument, right? I'm so smart that I would know it if I were wrong. But unfortunately, history is kind of like full of highly intelligent idiots, right? In fact, research suggests that high IQ people are particularly susceptible to this kind of thinking, right? Blindsided by precisely this bias. They're so used to being right in everything that they can't really imagine being wrong, right? Even in the face of quite like stark evidence. Then there is artificial general intelligence, or sort of the narrative about general artificial intelligence, which forms this sort of like backdrop for talking about generative AI. It's not really a narrative, it's more like a claim, right? It's stated like this axiomatic truth that artificial general intelligence is just a few years away, just like self-driving cars, and it's a bit scary. And it's a very important claim because sort of the belief that artificial general intelligence is imminent is sort of like a guarantee for continued progress for AI in general, right? So you have this sort of like self-reinforcing feedback loop. So what you can do with generative AI tools today, sort of impressive, right? So it increases our faith in that we'll one day have artificial general intelligence. And the idea that one day we will have this increases our faith in that the generative AI tools are going to become better and better and better and better. Finally, there's the singularity narrative, and this is also not sort of like independent from what we just discussed. It's sort of woven into the same thing. The main proponent for this narrative is the futurist and transhumanist Ray Kurzweil. And the idea is that if we can create a machine that is smarter than us, right, I just claimed that this was an idiot question, but that aside, when we've sort of created that machine, then that machine, surely, because it's smarter than us, can create a machine that's even smarter, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on, ad infinitum, right? And this is a kind of thinking that is based on intelligence being an essence rather than an abstraction, and it is based on this sort of like mathematical model rather than reality. This idea that you can have this exponential growth that goes on forever. And as I said, these narratives are not independent. They reinforce each other, and they paint this picture of inevitability. And I think we should do more to challenge them. And in fact, I use this word narrative for these things, but it's a little too naive, right? It's a little too neutral and a little too innocent, because it's not just stories that we tell, or who even tells them, right? They are really radical declarations that are aimed at constructing reality, right, by presenting them as axiomatic truth. So we shouldn't be innocent when thinking about this. And it's really quite remarkable. What you do, if you read like a LinkedIn post or something like that, that deals with AI, they will often start with one of these narratives as sort of like axiomatic declaration. The very first sentence will be something like AI revolutionizes this field. Right? And it's a declaration, a claim about current reality and the future that is presented as an observation, and it's really not. What it is marketing. Right? And it's really incredible to me how successful this marketing effort has been and continues to be. And it's very ironic. I mean, LLMs have been described as these stochastic parrots, right? And yet we are the parrots that are repeating these narratives, right? Seemingly without sort of stopping to think where they come from and if they're really true. So a much better approach, I think, for engaging with emerging technologies such as AI is through Neil Postman's 7 questions. These were outlined in a lecture called On Culture's Surrender to Technology. They're also discussed in his book, Technopoly, that I really recommend. Well, I'll get back to sort of the references in the end. So the 7 questions are these. I'm going to sort of go through them quite quickly. The first is the first is what problem does it solve? And it's when we try to answer these questions, it's important not to be naive about them. right? We might think that in the case of AI, well, then it's all the problems, right? Because it's intelligence, and that's how we solve hard problems. A very different perspective is that from the from the perspective of an employer, it solves the problem of wage costs, right? That is a different problem. Whose problem is it? And we just saw a hint that it might be different problems to different people. What new problems does it create? And this is something that we very rarely look at, right? We look at the primary effects, and we sort of rarely look at secondary effects, tertiary effects, and so on and so forth. Which people stand to be most impacted by it? And are these the same people who stand to benefit from it? And very often it's not. And what shifts in economic and political power will result from introducing the technology? We have seen a tremendous accumulation of wealth and power onto very few hands over the last decades, right? And the current AI wave is a continuation and a radicalization of that process. So this is worth considering. Is this a good thing? And what unintended uses we will have. And we will get back to that when we discuss harms. Okay, so let's start digging into the hype and reality of the current AI wave. I'm not going to argue that AI is a hype. I'm just going to show you this picture. In general, it's an indication of hype when the sort of the advert focuses on the fact that it's AI rather than the problem that it solves. And it's also important, I think, to note that there is no way that you can revolutionize the brushing of my teeth, right? I have a dumb toothbrush at home. It's a stick with a brush on it, and it does an adequate job, right? So you cannot do that twice as good, 10 times as good. There is no way you can do that. Of course, this is just amusing, right? So it's hype, right? And people want to buy into that. I'm more concerned about sort of the effect of hype on free will, because it might be that you're looking at these things and, oh, well, I'm not going to sort of go into that. It doesn't necessarily matter if you believe in the hype or not. You may have to play along either way. You might find that unless you go all in on AI, you might risk losing out in sort of the struggle for resources and attention, right? And this forces people to put sort of like an AI spin on everything they do, even if there's really no need for or room for applying AI. You sort of have to pretend that there is, right? Which is this sort of like strange kind of theater. But okay, sort of look aside from that. How much should we invest in AI, or basically any technology for that matter, but now we're talking about AI. Well, how much should we invest? That depends on the expected return. And this is where this singularity narrative is extremely important. Because if we can create an artificial general intelligence that's smarter than us, that triggers this Kurzweilian process that will sort of generate infinite intelligence, right? That's sort of the logical conclusion, that we'll have infinite intelligence. That's like inventing magic. Because then we can sort of have solutions to all the problems in the world. We can have cold fusion, we can cure cancer, we can reverse aging, we can live forever, and so on and so forth. So that gives you infinite returns, right? And when you have infinite returns, you don't have to be modest when you ask for money, when you're talking to investors, right? You can ask for trillions, you can ask for Scrooge McDuck numbers, right? Any finite number will be acceptable if you have infinite returns, right? If you subtract a gigantic number from infinity, you still have an infinity, right? So it's a bit like a conjurer's trick, right? Because it tips all the calculations in your favor, right? You can legitimize everything if you have infinity. Even if it's a low probability for infinity, it's still infinity. It's much harder if the returns are not infinite. And we know the world isn't infinite. There are no infinities in a finite world. That's just the way it is. Infinity is a mathematical concept. So what if the returns are not infinite? Then you have to start talking about sort of like opportunity costs. which is the cost of doing this and not something else, right? What is the opportunity cost of the current AI hype, right? There are a lot of problems that we know how to solve today without AI, but it's hard to get funding and attention for those things. So there is an opportunity cost. Okay, if we look at the claim that AI is revolutionizing everything from programming to brushing your teeth, what does that entail? Then we have to ask questions like, well, what qualifies for a revolution? Just saying that is a revolution doesn't really tell us anything. We have to be more concrete than that. Is it 10 times better or faster or cheaper or something like that for whatever it is that we're quantifying? Or is twice as good, is that a revolution? I mean, twice as good is good, right? It's very good. What about 10%? Now I think it's harder to argue that's a revolution, right? Even though 10% is good. 1%, I mean, it's an improvement, right? Given that everything else stays the same, 1% better is 1% better. So I'm going to take that if everything else stays the same. And this would be a disappointment. Let's hope we don't end up there. But okay, so what exactly is the change? What is the revolutionary change? Where do we look for the revolution? And the obvious candidate is cost, right? If we can produce something much faster than before, then it's going to cost less, and we can be more productive. And being more productive means that we can either stop doing it faster or doing it more seldom or something like that, or we can produce a whole lot more of something, which might be good at least up to a point, right? You might saturate your appetite for some things at some point. It might be that at some point you've had enough. What about quality? Quality is a bit of an unknown, right? It could go both ways. It could be better, it could be worse, it could be roughly the same, and it could even be hard to tell. For instance, it might be difficult to compare if it's like stably always okay quality is one kind of thing, and then you might have really high quality most of the time, but occasionally really bad quality. So which one is better? It's not so easy to compare. So how sort of like your quality breaks down, that's also a factor. Now, I was on the NDC Oslo Agenda Committee a couple of years ago, and we noticed a sort of a dramatic increase in the number of submissions. I think it was like 30% more submissions over previous years, and they were all these sort of like syntactically valid, sort of longish abstracts that were kind of hard to tell exactly what they're going to talk about, but it sort of kind of sounded impressive. And they were, of course, generated by AI tools, right? And it turned out that they competed poorly, and that was not because we were like AI haters or something like that, but it's just that it's kind of hard to get accepted at NDC Oslo. So your abstract has to be top-notch, right? And they didn't compete well because the best handwritten abstracts were better than sort of what you got out of these AI tools. So you have this sort of like weird situation where something can be really impressive and not really bad quality, but still not good enough in practice to solve the problem that you're trying to solve. And I think we're actually seeing a lot of that with generative AI. So impressive things that are still not good enough for what we want to do. What about the application of AI to programming? So in 1986, Frederick Brooks wrote this paper called No Silver Bullet on Essence and Accidents in Software Engineering. And he introduces this notion of a silver bullet that I'm sure you're all familiar with, and argues that we can't really get at that until we sort of attack the essence of software engineering and not just the sort of the accidental complexities. And a silver bullet he defines as an order of magnitude, that is 10x improvement in productivity, in reliability, in simplicity. So this is our 10x scenario, the revolution that we talked about earlier, the sort of undisputed revolution, I think, is a 10x increase, right? Or whatever it is that we're measuring. So could generative AI then be a silver bullet for programming? Well, again, we have to sort of hone in on what exactly are we talking about? 10x of what? Now, if software development were like hauling bricks, right? Having a bunch of bricks and moving them from A to B, then 10x productivity would be all that was to it, right? It would be sufficient, right? Because there would be nothing more to say. The bricks were moved and you're done. Software development is not like hauling bricks. So there are a lot of important illities when you build software. These were sort of like the first that came to my mind when I was making this slide. It took me like 10 seconds to write these down. I'm sure you could come up with many more that are sort of like equally relevant. It's not meant to be exhaustive. So what happens if you have like a 10x effect on productivity? You have the ability now to produce code a lot faster. That's certainly a very interesting scenario here. Even though we don't know that we'll get 10x, but say that we did. Now, it's possible that AI tools can help with these other things as well. But again, the question is how much, and the answer, again, is we don't know. And we don't know with productivity either, so we're really in this situation. Right? So it's going to have an impact. We don't really know what that impact is. What we do know is that the theory of constraints tells us that the bottleneck will sort of move to the weakest step in the process. And so if we aim for a silver bullet, if we want this 10x improvement, then we're going to have to hit 10x for all of those illities, right? If we want our 10x productivity boost to matter, we need to sort of solve the other problems as well. Otherwise, we risk being in this situation where you have sort of like a proposed silver bullet that turns out to be a silver boomerang. So this is a possible scenario. And the reason is that we build systems that are meant, the reason that we build these systems is that they are going to have effects in the real world where we live, right? We want these systems to sort of have an effect in our world. And ultimately, it's us humans who have skin in the game, right? We build systems that influence the lives of ourselves and other humans. Whereas for an AI, it's ultimately all a game of numbers, right? It's a very sophisticated game of numbers, but it doesn't have skin in the game. Right? It doesn't really matter to the AI what the effects in the real world. It matters to us, not to the AI. Which brings us naturally to the topic of harm. So we've looked at ways in which the sort of like expectations may be overblown. Now we turn to sort of outright harms of the current AI wave. And it's important to note that these harms that I'm going to describe, they are not necessarily like intrinsic to the concept of artificial intelligence, right? It didn't have to be like this. We didn't necessarily have to have all these harms that I'm going to mention. But I think they are properties of the current AI wave. And the way sort of AI is introduced in our lives today, I think it's very real. It didn't have to be like this. I think it is like this. So this is what I'm seeing. I think we could have seen something else. I wish we would have seen something else, but it's not. Yes, so there are many harms, and I can only scratch sort of the surface of it. An obvious harm is environmental pressure, right? High consumption of energy and scarce resources in a world that's already hard-pressed for energy and resources. Right? So you have your energy consumption, carbon emissions, water usage for cooling, and so on and so forth. Also, the extraction of rare minerals, right, which may involve human exploitation, child labor, or slavery. These are all like terrible, terrible things, right? And I can't do it justice in this talk, so I'm not even going to try. It feels sort of bad to just mention it in passing because it's really, really serious, but it's really a whole talk in its own. I wish to see more talks about this, but I can't do it justice sort of like in 2 minutes. Right? But it's important in two ways. One thing is the environmental pressure in and of itself, right? The direct harm to the environment. Another is the declaration of intent. Right? So it's clear by the actions of the tech giants that they don't want to contribute to a transition to a more sustainable consumption of energy and resources. Right? It's abundantly clear that they will try to grab as much energy and resources as they can, and that there is no stopping point for that. And this should, I think, have implications of how we deal with tech giants. Right? They are not interested in reducing the pressure. We are, of course, looking at the destruction of livelihoods. in principle, so who can be affected? Whose livelihood could be affected by the introduction of AI tools? Basically, everyone who, in some way, produces data that is then used to train generative AI tools with the intent of having the machine performing the same task. Because then you sort of don't have to pay a human to do it. Who are those? Obviously, creatives, right? People who produce things that make life interesting. Let's get rid of those. Journalists, they are sort of basically attacking the livelihood of those who would ideally spend their time distinguishing facts from lies. Right? I think this sort of this goal of distinguishing facts and lies was already on the decline among journalists before generative AI, but this is accelerating now. Right? Programming, we'll see if it turns out to be a good idea to fire programmers or not, but executives will act on bad ideas. So there's the fact that it might be a bad idea doesn't necessarily stop someone from acting on it. And it's worth noting that whenever someone says that this tool or this technology frees up more time to focus on higher value tasks, I'm sure you've seen this, this is basically another narrative, right? Then that's a dog whistle for layoffs. That's what they're talking about, right? Remember that the problem that AI solves in the eyes of employers is labor cost. Right? So it's when they say this, they mean they're going to fire someone. We'll see some of this, right? If you train this dog to talk, it doesn't actually understand language, but it kind of sounds like it's having a conversation by mimicking the sound of human speech. And someone's going to say, awesome, I fired my entire staff. How quickly can it start diagnosing medical disorders? And this is tongue-in-cheek, but there is some truth to this. I think some may sort of live to regret those decisions and those actions, but that doesn't really help the people who lost their jobs. Right? There is no real, like I told you so here. Like, if I'm hit by a bus and then the bus sort of falls off a cliff afterwards, it doesn't really help me. I'm still hit by a bus. Right? Then there's overproduction. So the big selling point for generative AI is productivity. But this can quickly lead to overproduction. So I said that at some point we may be satiated. Right? As the cost and effort to produce something approaches zero, we may produce a whole lot more artifacts than we can ever sort of like meaningfully interact with. So it's incredibly easy to generate much more output than anyone can interact with in their lifetime. And this applies both to sort of like the corporate setting and outside of it. Right? So at work, you may have overzealous enthusiasts that sort of generate this flood of memos and demos and reports that no one will ever look at, but they're super productive. And it can become this sort of like denial of service attack, right? So you can't do anything else than cope with their output. And the bad part is that sort of the useful output sort of drowns in this sea, in the flood of output. So the trouble is not so much that AI is making you more productive, but it's that you're tripling the output of the biggest idiot where you work. I think this is real. This is unfortunately real. It's very easy, unfortunately, to envision all kinds of malicious applications of generative AI. And it's sort of unfair, because it's much easier to create a successful malicious application than a benign one. Right? If you're making a malicious application, all you need is some iota of success, and then you can claim success. If you're trying to do something benign with generative AI, you have to be sort of like successful all the time. And whenever something sort of acts up, then it's a problem. Right? Then it might not be good enough. Right? So it's really good for malicious applications. And in a sense, lying is the killer application for these tools, right? It's sort of what it does. It has no notion of truth. It acts on probability. So it lends itself very well to producing plausible lies, if that's what you want to produce. And some people want to produce plausible lies. So you'll see more sophisticated, plausible scams. It's going to be very hard, actually, to believe what we see and hear unless it sort of happens in front of us in the real world. Then we can maybe trust it. But if you sort of see a video or read a post or something like that, it might be a scam. Right? And I think these sort of like, it's very impressive what you can do with generative AI with respect to video now, right? I don't think these tools will ever produce like a full movie that's worth watching if you have like a quarter of a heart and a soul, right? But it's certainly good enough to produce very plausible footage of anyone in the world committing any act you can imagine, including any heinous crime that you want, or admitting to any heinous crime that you want using these tools. And we will be fooled, because it's that good, right? So it's plausible in that sense. Again, it's much easier to do a little bit of it than to sort of have high quality all the way through. So you can look forward to tailor-made disinformation using personal information about you, tailored to fool exactly you. And this obviously also applies to propaganda. Now, a couple of years ago, I meant to say weeks. A couple of weeks ago, there was a deepfake video where one of the candidates in the Irish presidential election supposedly withdrew from the race. A couple of days before the actual voting, apparently one of the candidates said that she would withdraw from the race. It went viral on Facebook. Commenters sort of believed this was real, and it was all fake. Right? So this is happening. People are using these tools to provide things that could have real-world impact, a serious impact. And all of this will sort of like undermine the notion of truth, and indisputable facts will be very hard to get by. Or to come by, right? They will be drowned out by a sea of plausible things that might have happened, or something that someone said that happened, and that they have the footage to show that it was true. So, in a sense, you will have to choose your own truth or your own sources for truth, even if you don't want to, even if you just want, well, I just want the real truth, right? It's going to be really hard. And unfortunately, as humans, we are biased towards believing things that we want to believe, which makes this rough for us, right? We want to believe certain things. And it's very hard for us to be neutral. This will lead to increased polarization and destabilization of society, paving the way for so-called like strong men or fascists. We're seeing this is happening in many places, unfortunately. And then so that was sort of like the malicious application. Then there are the sort of like dystopic ones, of which there are also many. Here's an example, and the idea here is to train an AI copy of you based on your personal data, ideally from your whole life, because then it becomes better and more realistic imitation of you. And if you then end up in a coma, instead of asking your loved ones what they should do, then you can ask the chatbot of you if they should turn off the switch. And so the headline here is, should an AI copy of you help decide if you live or die? And obviously the correct answer is, what the hell is wrong with you? But we don't know which of these terrible ideas and terrible application may actually be sort of like attempted. And it's important to note that loved ones in this situation are incredibly vulnerable, right? They have a terrible decision to make. They might be looking at sort of ways to escape, right? And this offers a way to escape. You can outsource the hard decision to something else. If you think that's sort of like too outlandish, not realistic that this will happen, this is already happening. So Robin Williams' daughter, who lost her father to suicide, a terrible thing, is receiving sort of like a flood of AI-generated videos of her father, right? That neither he nor she, of course, ever consented to, right? So they never said that this was okay, but she's receiving this flood of videos, AI videos of her dad. So they're basically like animating his corpse without asking him, without asking her if she wants that to happen. So that's pretty dystopic, I think. There are simply poor applications as well. And poor applications are sort of a little bit more innocent than the malicious ones and the dystopic ones. Some of them are just like funny. This is a picture used by Nes kommune, Nes municipality, to promote like a service for families. And it seems like you're noticing what's wrong here. It's like, it's this guy, right? It's the clone. It's the fact that it's the same guy twice. Or is it that one of them is having half a baby for dinner while the others are having spaghetti, right? So this here seems to be the biggest problem. So Nes kommune, on being made aware of this problem with what's being served for dinner, they published an updated picture which removed the baby, kept the human clone, and also has more of these sort of like, you shouldn't zoom in on the faces because that's sort of like the stuff of nightmares. You have the classic problems with the hands and the fingers. We've seen these things before. But these things, I think, are solvable. These things will improve over time, right? So we won't have this sort of like terrible faces to look at. But it points towards an interesting problem, and something that I think is not going to improve, which is output blindness, right? Which is the phenomenon that you don't check, apparently. Right? You're so happy to get something that superficially looks okay that you don't even see the flaws when they are glaring. And this seems to be a feature of our brains, right? So there is no way that anyone, the people in Nes kommune who produce this, they cannot have looked at this picture, right? Not with their eyes open and their sort of like brain engaged, because they would have seen that there was a baby on the plate. So I think they suffered from some brain thing, something that's sort of innate in our brains, which switches off the ability to actually sense what is right in front of us. And I think this is serious, right? I think we don't notice it, and we don't notice that our brains have shut down. Right? And this spells trouble for all workflows that propose that AI tools should generate a lot of things, and then humans should verify. Right? Because we're not good at that. We are much better at constructing something that's real and that's sort of good by sort of and correct in the first place. We can construct things that are correct. But that seems to be sort of like a necessary precondition for engaging our brains in the way that we will actually see what's in pictures. Now, this is sometimes amusing. Serving half a baby is kind of funny. Since it's not real. I mean, it would be terrible if it were real. But it can lead to poor policy decisions. Right? There are multiple cases in public sector in Norway where they use AI tools to generate reports that are then used to make actual policy decisions and may influence those decisions. And those reports have been shown to contain glaring hallucinations, which is a problem. Right? And that may lead to sort of poor applications turning into irresponsible and harmful behavior. Right? We may be facing the death of the web as we know it. Now, this sounds a bit alarmist, and there's something called dead internet theory, which is this conspiracy theory that says that for the last 10 years, internet has really been dead. That it's all generated content and bots. And I don't think that it's true that it's been dead for 10 years, but I think maybe we're heading in this direction. Right? And it is true that sort of like the amateur web was largely dead 10 years ago, having been replaced by these like walled gardens like Facebook and social media, things that are owned by big corporations. And as Google moves towards more like AI-generated responses to searches or queries, sort of basically taking searches as prompts, third parties will be shut off from internet traffic, right? Which will reduce revenues for publishers, disincentivize content creators, and so on and so forth. Basically, Google is creating their own walled garden and cutting off the oxygen from the rest of the internet. This will be a problem. And then there is overproduction that is poisoning the web as well. So the percentage of AI slop is rising quickly. If you look at sites like Pinterest and LinkedIn, it's sort of like drowning in slop. It's very hard to sort of sift through what's really real there. And it's unclear to me how long there will be a human audience for this. Right? I certainly will not be sort of consuming those services. On LinkedIn, you can get help from their AI to write the post and also to generate a suitable response to a post. So this is completely ripe for automation, right? Why keep the human in the loop? Right? You can just automate infinite engagement by closing the loop, right? Have the bot write the thing and respond to the thing, and so on and so forth. You don't need people for that. And then you can scale up. So bots can play this game, and ultimately it may be hard for us to distinguish between sort of bot output and human output. And I think we will find that playing the Turing game, which is this a human or is it not, all day, every day is going to suck. I think we're going to hate it. And then there's privacy, and I think privacy is really too small a word for what I have in mind. What's really at stake is the concept of individual integrity and sort of like personal agency, the ability to determine what you want to do unfettered and for yourself. And to sort of lead into that, I want to stop and consider what is the worst idea one could possibly have in the world. Like really the worst idea you can think of. Here's a candidate. Sexting with Sam Altman. I would not do this, right? And the problem is not that Sam Altman isn't hot. I'm sure there are people who find Sam Altman to be hot. There's someone for everyone, right? But the idea of sharing, that kind of stuff with OpenAI, with a big tech company, right? That's a big no for me because it's always a two-way transaction, right? And you don't know what your interaction with a sexy chatbot is going to be. But that's actually just the second worst idea in the world. The really worst idea in the world is giving Mark Zuckerberg access to your retina. This is the most stupid thing you could possibly do. Because it's important to note that what these smart glasses are is a man-in-the-middle attack, right? It means knowing what things you look at, how long you look at them, what keeps your attention, what you look away from, all those things, as well as the ability to interfere, inject information, and filter information to put on these glasses, right? To influence your behavior, because that's sort of like the business model. Of course, it's not just Facebook doing this, right? Everyone is creating some sort of like always-on assistant or wearable device or whatever that's always going to be there to help you and interact with you. And the goal is to be involved in everything we do, all the time, every second of every day, every second of every night. It's worth remembering what the big business model of these big tech companies is. Is it to sell ads? I mean, they do sell ads. We know that they sell ads. Selling ads doesn't sound so bad. What they really sell is influence. They really sell modification of opinions and behavior. That is what they do. That is what you do when you sell ads. But it can also be applied to different things. So increasing sales of some product by some percent, or changing public perception of something by some percent, or moving some percent of voters. These are all the same thing. This is the same use case for different customers. This is what they're offering. Right? Now you might protest, there are no ads in ChatGPT. Well, not yet. We know this is the business model. So they will have to do this, right? Because this is what they do. So we've seen the patterns. We know that what these companies will do. They will first try to attract users, and we've seen how aggressively they try to pursue users to use AI tools. Then they will try to maximize the value for their customers, their real customers, which are the people who want to influence your behavior, paying for the modification of opinions and behavior, and then they will shift towards maximizing short-term profit for shareholders, because that's how they make money. And we don't have to sort of wonder if this is reality or not. We have 20 years of evidence of this pattern. Right? Ever since Google launched Gmail for free, and it was like fantastic, and then they started analyzing all our emails for information and using that information to sell influence as a service, we know that this is the thing that they do. And this should influence what we are willing to share with big tech companies. That's why you don't want to sex with Sam Altman. Right? That's why you don't want Mark Zuckerberg on your retina. And this is also important because we know that these big tech companies don't answer to law where you live. They answer to US law. Right? And we cannot assume good faith or good intent. We need to remember that every interaction with these tools is an act of surveillance because they will note what happened, what you did, what happened afterwards, and so on and so forth. And every interaction is also a leverage point for influence. And this seems a nice point to circle back to our initial question, are we idiots? I think we have some things to think about and talk through. And I don't think I really have time to resources, so I'm just going to click very quickly through them. So my resources are first, Artificial Intelligence by Melanie Mitchell, great overview of the field. The Intelligence Illusion by Baldur Bjarnason. He has read more papers on AI than I ever will, right? And is great for the list of like references alone, but also for like the clear-headed analysis. There's AI Snake Oil by Narayanan and Kapoor about what artificial intelligence tools can do and cannot do today, an attempt to sort of distinguish between hype and reality. There is Computer Power and Human Reason by Joseph Weizenbaum. This is the guy who wrote the original ELIZA program, which was sort of the first like chatbot that made people feel that there is someone there who understands me. Right? Most of his thoughts are really relevant today, like 50 years after. There's On Bullshit by Harry Frankfurt, a really important, essential reading today in these days of infinite bullshit. There is The Mismeasure of Man by Stephen Gould. This is about how sort of like measurements of intelligence have been used typically in the name of scientific racism over the years. If you're interested in other parts of the mess inside our heads, I recommend Daniel Dennett's Consciousness Explained. Then there's Niels Postman's Technopoly. I really recommend this one. A lot of books. You should really read this one about sort of the business models of the big tech companies, Shoshana Zuboff's The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. And finally, this is the last book I'm going to mention, More Everything Forever by Adam Becker, to understand the really quite outlandish ideas that many of the most influential people in Silicon Valley have. And like this potent combination of essence and infinity do a lot of heavy lifting in the minds of these people. Which leads to strange results. And that was all. I'm sorry I'm a little bit over time. Thank you very much.